Hello, and welcome to Theory on Deck by Black Armada, where me, Becky Annison, and Josh Fox talk about aspects of role-playing game design and play culture. This is the second and final part of our series on Now Frame a Scene, funded by our amazing patrons. In part 1, which you can see whizzing past your eyes as I talk, we talked about the different elements that you need to set up a scene, who is there, the environment, but we also talked about the different ways to give a scene purpose, and you can find a link to part 1 on the screen right now. In part 2 we're going to talk more about giving a scene purpose, but also how to end scenes in the most satisfying ways. So without further ado, I'll stop talking, we'll stop whizzing past your eyes, and you can get into what we're going to be discussing next. Thank you.
Which can benefit from players going into scenes with their own determined purpose. Yeah. I think that Monster Hearts is a really good example, actually, where it's supposed to be about the messy relationships and the messy lives of teenagers. So there's a lot of Monster Hearts scenes, even with the GM doing their brilliant, cool GM-ly stuff. It's really good to go into that saying, okay, well, in this scene, I want to provoke that person, or I want to call that person out for that terrible thing that they did. And that's kind of, I would say, as an MC, that's really helpful when you've got players who've got a really clear idea of a thing they want to get out of a scene as well. Yeah. Did you want to talk a bit more about scene framing in Flotsam and how that's different?
I do, but just before I do, I just want to react to something you just said, which I think so in any kind of relationship-based game like Monster Hearts, it seems to me like a really good player practice is to react strongly to what happens. So whenever just anything that the GM or another player is doing, you want to react strongly to it, because that's going to make a better scene than if you just kind of go, oh, okay, and move on.
Is it time for me to talk about my things that the only way is Essex can teach us about role-playing?
Okay, sure. Why don't you?
So, I've mentioned this before on podcasts, because it's really important to me. But scripted reality TV is amazing for relationship games. If you like relationship games, watch scripted reality TV, because there are certain rules that scripted reality TV follows, which will supercharge your role-playing in relationship games, like Monster Hearts. And the first rule is, everybody has an opinion on everybody else's life. So, like, in real life, Josh, if you made a decision, even a decision that I wasn't super keen on, unless I was in a relationship with you, which I am, then I probably wouldn't say anything. You know? If my friend
you might not even care.
I might not even care, you know. But in reality TV shows, people really, scripted reality TV, they really care. Everybody's got an opinion about everybody else's life, and they talk about it loudly and often. You know, people will go up and routinely tell their friends that people have been, you know, their boyfriend has been flirting with other people, or, you know, calling them out for terrible behaviour. So number one is have opinions about what the other characters do. Number two, be loud about voicing those opinions, preferably in a way which will cause a massive scene, because that's another thing about reality TV. People don't tell people that their boyfriend is having an affair unless it's like in the middle of somebody's birthday party, or better, their engagement party or something. So, like, pick the worst possible moment to have a loud, obnoxious opinion about what somebody else did. And the other thing about reality TV, they always forgive each other. People get back together like 15 times in a series and break up and have massive rows. So I think, is it Monster Hearts which talks about playing NPCs like they're stolen cars? Or is it
so
Apocalypse
that is what
World?
it said in the first edition. I'm trying to remember whether it still says it in the second edition, or whether it just says play your character like you're driving a stolen car, which I actually think, whether that's the advice now or not, that would be better advice in my view.
That's what Simon talks about when he plays
That's certainly how I play my Monster Hearts characters.
Play them like stolen cars. But
Yeah.
I would say look at things like The Only Way is Essex and Geordie Shore, and I'm not sure what the American equivalents are. Jersey Shore?
Jersey Shore, yeah, I think that might be a thing, but I don't know whether it's the same thing.
Have opinions, have them loudly, have them at inappropriate moments, forgive people, and so put yourself in a vulnerable situation where they can screw you over all over again, and then do it all over again.
Right.
That's my chat.
So that's kind of a much more developed version of what I was saying about reacting strongly. But I think there's a kind of second level to reacting strongly to what people do, and that is go into a scene planning to do something that other people are going to react strongly to, right? And that's what I mean by purpose. And it might be that the scene was kind of about something else, or it might be that you deliberately frame a scene to make it happen. But going in with the purpose of saying or doing something that you know is going to get a reaction is really good player advice for that kind of game, and will mean that the GM can kind of sit back and watch the sparks fly, and that's often more fun, both as a player and as a GM, than following some kind of pre-scripted GM thing that they've had planned out.
You know that I have very strong opinions about GMing Monster Hearts, which I might do a video about some point in the future, because it's probably my favourite. It's my favourite game to GM, but I GM it in a very particular way. I've got very strong opinions about GMing it for the best experience. But one of the things that I would really advocate in Monster Hearts as GM is that if the players are so busy screaming at each other over their relationships, your job as MC is done.
Shut up, yeah.
Don't say a word. Your job as MC is to give them lots of opportunities and prod them and put them in situations which will cause this pressure cooker to boil over. And when it boils over, sit back and get your popcorn out, because your work is done.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so anyway, you asked me about Flotsam.
Flotsam.
So that was a bit of a
digression,
deviation from that. So yeah, so Flotsam has a really specific way of framing scenes, and what it does is it gives people it gives a specific person responsibility for framing a scene depending on what purpose they have in mind for the scene, and it doesn't just kind of rotate around the table or what have you in a fairly, that's quite a common thing to do, right? It sort of semi does that. So I have a list of 4 things a scene could be about. It could be that I want to have a conversation with your character. Okay, so there's something I want to talk to you about. So I'm going into the scene wanting to have a specific conversation with you. So that's purpose number 1. And that is the top priority purpose in Flotsam, because Flotsam is a game about relationships, about people talking to each other. So when we come to frame a new scene, if somebody's got that in their back pocket, that's what happens, and we don't bother with any of the other things. I think the second thing is that somebody wants to throw something external at a character. So it's like for Flotsam is a bit like Dream Askew, people might have heard of. It has each player owns what's called a situation, which is, I call it, a constellation of threats and problems and issues. Like, say, you could own the gangs that are in the game. So I could decide I'm going to throw a particular gang at you. I know that you owe them a debt, so I'm going to have them come and beat you up and demand to have their money back, right? So that's the second type of purpose, is I get something from an external situation and I have a go at you with it. And so then in my question terminology, the question is how are you going to respond to that? And that's second on the list of priorities. After the talking, it's the third thing I can't remember. And
it's not like you designed the game or anything.
I don't know. There must be a copy somewhere near here, but I can't see it right now. And then finally, like, if you've run out of really interesting things to do, then you go back to the question which always kicks off the game, which is that somebody asks you a question about your everyday life, and you frame a scene to deliver that. And again, you were sort of talking about feeling it's kind of almost a bit stilted to be trying to steer a scene to answer a question, but the key thing is here that you are not steering the scene to answer the question. You've deliberately framed the scene in such a way that the question will be answered, and then we just see what happens. So I guess I just give that as an example of how you can you can make it very structured who is going to frame a scene, not just who is going to frame a scene, but also what sort of purpose they should have in mind, and you can prioritise those purposes to shape the kind of experience.
Would we call that, so if we're talking about framing scenes, who, what, where, when, would we talk about the purpose as the why?
Yeah,
Why are we even here having this?
Yeah, and that's what maybe I should just make that clear. Actually, so it's not the case in Flotsam that at the beginning, let's say I'm framing a scene where I want to come and talk to you and confess my undying love, and so I
love how this is your go-to example.
Yeah,
because I am here for being confessed to.
Cool, we'll do that later. So I do not say at the start of the scene, this is a scene in which I am going to confess my undying love to you. Okay, that, for my preferences in role playing, would be super boring because I want to find that out,
surprise and delight
in character, and also you do not say, and because I've been waiting to have a scene with you, I'm actually planning to break up with you. Again, I want to find that out in the scene, and it's the absolute super best thing that can happen is that I come and confess my undying love, and then you break up with me, or you break up with me, and then we see the little tear just trickling down my cheek. I'm so sad. But instead I say, it's late at night. You're sat by the campfire, and I come and I bring you this bowl of soup. That's the scene framing, but I've done it because I've got that purpose in mind. Right?
Yeah.
And I just think that's quite important. You can do it where you define the why in advance, and that's a perfectly valid way of doing it. But I like it when somebody comes in with a purpose in mind and I find out what that was.
I think we should be really clear here and say that the why has already been defined in advance. It's whether it's discussed amongst all the other players.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't need the why to be agreed with all the other players. I just need one player who's in this scene to have a why.
But it's an important aspect of the game design, or if it's not been designed into the game, it's an important aspect of your play culture. Whether you're all kind of so revealing what your purpose is in the scene in advance helps to get you all on the same page, and you hopefully all steer towards each other. So that's a good thing. But not revealing it creates the sense of drama that you get from watching a TV show where you do not know what the scene's going to be about, and you find out in the middle and your jaw drops, Yeah. And I personally tend to lean towards the latter. It's the reason why we have the leaping to conclusions in Lovecraft-esque, right? Because it means that there's none of this kind of discussing what the story should be about. Instead, we find out by playing.
Yes. Enjoy the sensation of being surprised and delighted by the other people around the table.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're getting quite close to wrap up, which means that this is a perfect opportunity to talk about how to end scenes.
Yes. How should we end scenes?
How should we end scenes? Well, I mean, I think as well is that it's really clear that when you are GMing a game, the scene is ended when the GM says it's ended. And there's probably a whole separate video that we should do about how a GM decides when it is time to end the scene. Oh no, you're jumping up down. You're itching to say something, aren't you? You don't agree.
Well, I guess that's the default, right?
Yeah.
I think it's totally valid in most GM'd games for a player to go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
I'm not done. There was something I wanted to do here. And usually the GM will say, oh, okay then, unless they're really kind of fed up with how long the scene's going on, or they really need to do something, then they'll be like, fine, okay, do it.
I think knowing when to end a scene is really hard, actually, though, for both GM'd and GM-less games, because, I mean, there's various advice out there that I've seen in podcasts and in game books, which just says, oh, well, you just know when a scene is over. You know it when you see it. And it's like, well, sometimes you do.
Thanks.
Sometimes you don't. And different people are going to have really different ideas about what it looks like when a scene's over. And yeah, sometimes you get lucky and everybody realises the scene has come to a natural endpoint. And often you don't. And actually, again, going back to it's really frustrating when you have a scene and it starts off in this really drifting, meandering way, and it takes everybody ages to get into it. And it's the same is true right at the end. You've had a really intense scene, and now you're just kind of drifting and meandering, and everybody's lost confidence in the scene, and you can kind of tell. And then somebody has to just call it and say, I think the scene is over. Should we just end everybody's suffering and call this scene over? Yeah. Is there a better way of saying, right, we're done? Is there?
Yeah. Well, it's not possible to totally know, is it? Because you're all contributing to the scene. and you don't know, if you say, right, finish now, no takesy backsies, something really amazing might have been about to happen. Oh well, you know, you lost that opportunity. But I think a scene can be underdone, like it hasn't really quite reached fruition, or it can be overdone, like it reached fruition ages ago and we're just fucking about.
It's hard to know. There is a sweet spot in a scene, isn't there? Whether it's ending it on a cliffhanger. I mean, that's not. Maybe there's some options here. So, number one, if your scene has got a clearly defined purpose, once that purpose has been fulfilled, you can end it any time after that because the meat of the scene has happened.
Yeah.
Number two, look out for dramatic cliffhangers. That's a nice point. I mean, you don't want to do that in every single scene, but it's nice to end a scene on a cliffhanger sometimes. I think that if your scene doesn't have a clearly defined purpose, a why, then it's really hard. It's much, much harder to know when to satisfyingly end a scene.
Yeah.
Your why is a really good guidance for that. What are your conditions for meaning that this scene can now be ended?
So I think a lot of games that don't have a formal purpose definition system, a scene ends when somebody says, "Okay, so I'm leaving now." Right?
Yeah.
You're in a room. You just killed the dragon, and you're like, "Okay, well, I go to the next room."
Yeah.
Okay, new scene. Probably in that kind of game, you don't actually say the words "new scene" at all. But you can't, that's kind of what defines a scene. And I do sense that sometimes in games that you kind of get scenes that kind of bumble along until somebody says, "Okay, well now I want to go and do a thing because I'm now bored of this," and that's when the scene ends. But you don't have to wait for that, I don't think. And I think you're right. Like, so what I do again, if I can just talk about Flotsam.
Don't tell me, tell them.
They're not talking to me. They're watching silently.
I told you this is your Fleabag cheeky wink to camera moment.
Right, so in Flotsam, the basic rule is once you have completed the purpose for which you framed the scene, that's a good time to end it. But I don't actually. You shouldn't do it straight away. That's usually you want to allow a little bit of time for kind of people to react to the thing that's just happened. Quite often, the really cool thing that's just happened. There's just a little bit more, and you'll know it when you see it.
Oh gosh.
But the general thing in Flotsam is anybody can call for a scene to end, and anyone should call for a scene to end if they think it has ended, right? Because in my experience, scenes usually end up being overcooked rather than undercooked.
Yes.
And therefore, if somebody thinks it's ended, it probably should have. So good, they're empowered to say so. But B, having said so, that creates a little bit of pressure for people to just get their fucking act together and finish it off. Because anyone is also allowed to say, "No, I have something more to do." But now that they've heard the person say, "So is the scene over?" They know that maybe they
clock
should.
Now.
Yeah, I could get on with it. Stop kind of spinning it out.
I think time pressure is very interesting. And that makes me want to talk about Alice Grizzle's game, which is on Itch.io, called Kiss Her Before the World Ends.
Oh, that's very trendy of you to say Itch.io.
Itch.io. I've played that game, Kiss Her Before the World Ends, and that has another way of ending scenes, which is really awesome and makes for a really interesting game experience. So in Kiss Her Before the World Ends, scenes end because a timer goes off. Scenes have you have 3 minutes to do your scene, and obviously I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say that the premise of Kiss Her Before the World Ends is that the world is ending in the game world.
Shit.
Oh, no. So when your timer goes off, it's because a way in which the world is ending has cut your conversation off. So if you're on a spaceship, the alarms have started going off because an airlock door is blown or whatever, but there's a pressing reason why this scene cannot go on any further, and everybody in the scenes knows that there is a time limit. And that creates such an interesting dynamic and such an interesting pressure that you're trying to cram in these conversations before the timer goes off. And also it means that the scenes end in a really, really cool way, because if you are midway through a dramatic conversation because you didn't get your skates on and start talking about the meaty stuff early enough, then tough. And the kind of tension that leaves you with of we didn't get to finish that it's really awesome and really cool. So that is another way of doing it, is artificial time deadlines with a timer in that particular genre. And this goes back again to the genre of the game, the kind of the very tight scenario that the game is cleaving to, and that the way the scenes end absolutely rams home that theme. Really awesome, really cool. People should, look at different ways of ending scenes as another creative constraint, I think, in building their games.
Can I actually mention a classic? Well, it's classic now. It's gone to the second edition, so it must be game Fiasco. So Fiasco's scene framing is extremely loose, I would say, but the scene ending it's got a neat bit of technology in it that I like, which is one person's job, or possibly the table's job, will be to decide whether the scene is going to end badly or the scene is going to end well. So, and if the person whose scene it is, the focal character for that scene, is also the person who framed the scene, then everyone else around the table is going to decide the answer to that, whether it's going to go well or badly, right? And they do it by holding up a white die or a black die. That's my recollection. I can't remember which way around it is, which one's good and which one's bad, but they'll hold it up. And what's really cool about that is the scene is proceeding, hopefully somebody has come up with something interesting that's happening in the scene, because I don't think the scene framing necessarily guarantees that, but somebody's kind of driving forward a situation of some sort, and we're not sure what's going to happen, and then somebody holds that dice up, and that just prompts people to collapse the waveform, to kill Schrodinger's cat finally once and for all. We find out what's going to happen, and then it happens, and then bam, scene's over. So it doesn't. That's not a scene ending mechanic, but it is a way of signalling. Okay, now it's his time to resolve this scene, and once the scene is resolved, then it ends.
So it's like saying, right now we're in the end game of this scene.
I think so. It's a bit like somebody saying, so is that the end of the scene then?
Yeah.
But it's a step back from it, saying, so is it time to kind of get this done now? And
cool.
The answer is yes, it is, and that character is now going to die horribly in a car crash, and that'll be the end of the scene. Lots of lovely fire.
So, following our own advice, is this vlog over? Is this video podcast over?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so
but hold on, I've got one more thing to do. No, I don't really.
Okay, so thank you very much for tuning in. Any games that we have mentioned will be down in the show notes below, including a link to our Patreon. And thank you very much to our patrons who funded this video, or might be 2 videos by the time I've cut it into. And thank you very much. You're all awesome. I hope this was helpful. And if you have any questions about scene framing, about scene purpose, about scene endings, then put them in the comments below, or ask us on Twitter, or we're all over the internet, so ask Black Armada Games if you've got other questions. Thank you very much.
Bye. This video was funded through the Black Armada Patreon. We use our Patreon to make lots of cool small games, write interesting blog posts about game theory and play and the gaming business, and create videos like this. And if you liked it, then please head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/blackarmada, and give us some cash.